The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way, the Swedish supergroup is back.
At 78, Benny Andersson finally shares the real story behind ABBA. It's more than music and fame. It's about the pain, the escape, and the personal struggles that shaped their iconic sound. Benny reveals the hidden truths we've long sensed but never truly heard before. Stay tuned as he opens up about the deeper emotions and experiences that fueled one of the world's most legendary bands. The architect of sound. Before ABBA became the global music machine it is today, Benny Andersson was just a boy fascinated by melodies, not fame. He grew up surrounded by classical and folk music, learning structure and emotion long before he touched a synthesizer. While the world would later sing along to Dancing Queen, Benny was shaped by the Swedish accordion and church harmonies. These early roots gave him a steady musical compass, even as ABBA chased disco lights. His sound came from a deeper place, not trends but timeless layers. Benny's work with Björn Ulvaeus created a balance most bands never find. Benny crafted the chords, the tension, the feeling, while Björn handled the lyrics and story. Together, they built songs that felt simple but hid emotional weight under every beat. Benny didn't just write music, he sculpted it. This process made ABBA songs feel alive, even decades later. In the studio, Benny was relentless. He would spend entire days adjusting a single harmony or note. He'd chase a feeling more than a sound, working until the track matched the emotion in his mind. There are stories of Benny replaying sections again and again, not for perfection, but for honesty. Every song was a message, even if listeners didn't always hear the full meaning. While Agnetha and Frida stood in the spotlight, Benny often watched from the background. He once admitted he never truly felt seen in ABBA, not as a star, but as a craftsman. Fans screamed for the singers, but few noticed a man arranging every string, every echo. Behind the glass of control room, Benny carried the pressure to make everything work. He wasn't the face of ABBA, but he was always the core. He was also the fixer, the one expected to hold the band together. When creative tensions rose, Benny often stepped in to smooth things out. He managed not just the music, but the emotions behind it. That role wore him down quietly. Over time, being the group's glue became a silent burden he rarely talked about. Most don't realize how much Benny shaped ABBA's identity. Without him, the band might have sounded bright, but hollow. His chord progressions brought sadness into joyful melodies, creating a contrast people couldn't explain but always felt. Even the happiest ABBA songs had shadows underneath, and that was Benny's doing. He gave their music depth without drawing attention to himself. He also pushed technology in the studio. Benny wasn't afraid to use early synthesizers and multitrack recordings to expand their sound. While other bands stuck to simple formulas, ABBA used layers of instruments and effects that felt rich and cinematic. Benny didn't settle for what was popular. He built soundscapes that told stories on their own. His studio work laid the groundwork for modern pop production. What sets Benny apart is how he turned silence into part of the sound. He knew when to hold back, when to let a melody breathe. That control made ABBA songs feel more human. He wasn't showing off. He was building trust with the listener, guiding them through highs and lows. This skill can't be taught, and it's why their music still holds up today. In a recent interview, Benny revealed a surprising truth. He said he used music to process feelings he couldn't express in real life. While others in the group dealt with emotions directly, he let the piano do the talking. That means many of ABBA's saddest, most beautiful songs were Benny's way of avoiding confrontation. He wasn't hiding, but he wasn't fully present either. This idea changes how we understand ABBA. Behind the group's perfect image was a man struggling with connection. Benny wasn't distant because he didn't care. He was distant because music gave him a safer place to feel. Every track was both creation and escape. It was how he held himself together, while everything else pulled apart. Now, at 78, Benny looks back and sees a pattern. He knows he didn't chase fame. He chased a feeling of a perfect note, a clean resolution. And while ABBA became a worldwide phenomenon, he often felt like a stranger inside it. The applause didn't fill the gap, but the music still does. The truth behind ABBA's success wasn't just music. It was hidden rivalry, ego, and a deeper frustration no one saw. The world loved to talk about ABBA's female rivalry. Fans argued over who was the better singer, who wore the better outfits, and who had more drama. But the real unspoken tension had nothing to do with Agnetha or Frida. It was Benny, silently competing, not with a person, but with fame itself. He wasn't chasing applause, but recognition for something deeper than what the world saw. In every photo shoot and headline, the spotlight leaned toward the women. Their beauty, fashion, and personal lives drew the cameras. Meanwhile, Benny and Bjorn were quietly labeled the men behind the music. No matter how many songs they wrote or hits they produced, they weren't the face of the brand. For Benny, this wasn't just about credit. It was about being seen for who he really was. Benny wasn't a background figure. He was the architect of their entire sound. He spent long hours layering harmonies, crafting chords, and making the melodies that stuck in people's heads for decades. But when awards rolled in or magazines featured the group, his name barely made the footnotes. He wasn't angry at the women. He was hurt by how the world ignored the real work behind the shine. He created the emotion, but others got the spotlight. Benny has said he was often cast as the cold brain of ABBA. It made him sound like a machine, smart but distant, technical but not emotional. Yet the truth was the opposite. He was pouring his soul into those songs. He wasn't just programming music. He was expressing pain, love, and longing through every chord. This mislabeling followed him for years. Critics and fans treated ABBA songs as catchy pop without depth. But behind that simplicity was Benny's heartbreak, discipline, and obsession with perfection. He built songs that made people cry, but those tears were often credited to the singers. Benny's quiet resentment grew, not against his bandmates, but against how the story was told. In interviews, Benny has started opening up about how this shaped his view of legacy. He doesn't want applause for fame. He wants people to understand the sacrifice. While the women faced their own pressures in the spotlight, Benny was slowly being erased from his own work. His name wasn't trending. His face didn't sell posters. But without him, there was no music. This isn't about ego, it's about truth. Benny helped create a global phenomenon, yet he often felt invisible within it. He wasn't chasing popularity. He was trying to prove that music wasn't just entertainment. It was his voice, his therapy, and his language. Being treated as just a technician behind a pop group was like being misunderstood at the deepest level. The real rivalry wasn't Benny versus the women. It was Benny versus perception. He was locked in a silent battle against a world that didn't see how much of himself he put into the songs. The fame gap between him and the singers wasn't about talent. It was about image. And that gap left him feeling forgotten, even while standing on the biggest stages in the world. As time passed, Benny stopped trying to change the narrative. He focused on his work, film scores, musicals, and other creative projects where he had full control. But even in those quiet years, the frustration lingered. He knew what he had contributed. He knew how little of it was truly acknowledged. Recently, Benny admitted that he used to read reviews hoping someone would notice the structure of his songs, the emotions in the arrangements, or the musical risks he took. Most didn't. He was either ignored or misunderstood. And even now, people remember the faces, not the man who built the foundation. That silence became a legacy of its own. Benny never wanted fame in the traditional sense, but he wanted fairness. He wanted people to see that he was more than a keyboard player in the back. He was the one sculpting the sound that carried every emotion, and when the world called it pop fluff, it cut deeper than anyone realized. This chapter reframes what fans thought they knew about ABBA's internal dynamics. The real divide wasn't personal, it was structural. Fame has rules, and Benny didn't fit the mold. He was too quiet, too private, too focused on the work. But without him, there would have been no magic to market. And that's the truth history almost forgot. The unraveling. ABBA's success in the late 70s seemed unstoppable. With their catchy tunes and global fame, it looked like they were on top of the world. But behind the glamour, cracks were starting to form. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown or a sudden fight, but a slow, painful decline, like a house quietly rotting from within. The pressure of constant touring, creative exhaustion, and emotional strain started to take its toll on the group. As the years went on, Benny and the rest of ABBA found themselves caught in a relentless cycle. Touring took them to every corner of the globe, but it also drained their energy. The fans were cheering, the hits kept coming, but something was missing. For Benny, it was a sense of honesty in the music. He recalls the exact moment when he knew it was time to stop, not because of any conflict, but because the music no longer felt true. The spark that made the early songs feel fresh and exciting had started to fade, and what they were creating no longer resonated with him in the same way. Benny admits that by the time ABBA came to a halt, he wasn't there because of passion or love for the group. It was guilt and duty that kept him in the band. He stayed because he felt responsible for the success and didn't want to let anyone down. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the same. The creative joy that once drove him was gone. He had become trapped in the weight of obligations, rather than continuing out of any true excitement for the music. The end came without much ceremony. There wasn't a big conversation or emotional farewell, just a slow fade into silence. There were no grand goodbyes or closure, just a sudden realization that it was over. The band members went their separate ways, and the headlines scattered across the media, hinting at the end of an era. Benny reflects on how strange it was that they never really discussed it as a group. They didn't sit down to talk about what was happening or how they were feeling. It was just an unspoken decision that had been made, and the music stopped. Frida, on the other hand, moved on quickly. She had already started emotionally detaching from the band even before it officially ended. For her, the end had come sooner, and she had found a way to let go. But for Benny, it wasn't as easy. He admits that it took him another decade to truly realize that he hadn't fully moved on. He hadn't come to terms with the end of ABBA, and the emotional weight of it lingered in ways he couldn't escape. The silence that followed the split haunted him, and he didn't understand at the time just how much it had affected him. Benny now looks back at the end of ABBA as a time of creative death rather than scandal or personal drama. The band didn't break up because of a big fight or because of some sensational story. It was simply that the creative well had run dry. The emotional paralysis that followed was something the public didn't see. Fans and the media were looking for a juicy story, a dramatic ending, but the reality was much quieter. It was the kind of quiet collapse that people didn't notice until it was already too late. For Benny, the end of ABBA wasn't about a specific event or a falling out with his bandmates. It was a series of small moments where the spark faded. The passion for creating music together had dissolved, leaving behind only a hollow shell of what they once were. But even after the music stopped, the pressure didn't let up. The expectations for ABBA to keep delivering hits, the weight of their past success, continued to hang over them, even as the band was no longer active. Reflecting on that time, Benny sees it now for what it was, a period of exhaustion, both creatively and emotionally. It wasn't just about the music. It was about how they had lost themselves in the process. ABBA had given so much of their energy to the world that they had nothing left to give each other. Benny's confession about staying in the band out of guilt, rather than passion, adds a new layer to the story of ABBA's end. It wasn't a choice made out of excitement or love for what they were doing. It was simply a matter of not knowing how to let go. In the end, ABBA's dissolution wasn't driven by a single dramatic event, but by a gradual disillusionment. The group had given everything to the music and to the fans, but in the process, they had lost themselves. The pressure of maintaining their public image, combined with creative burnout and emotional detachment, made it impossible to continue. Benny's perspective on the end of ABBA offers a fresh, more nuanced view of the band's breakup, one that is rooted not in scandal, but in the slow and painful reality of creative and emotional exhaustion. ABBA's end was not marked by anger or drama, but by an understanding that the music had run its course. It was a silent collapse, one that no one could see until it was already over. Finding peace, a composer in exile, after ABBA's final curtain call, Benny disappeared from the spotlight. He wasn't trying to avoid the public eye, but more so to find peace after the storm of fame. He dove into new projects, mostly focusing on theater, orchestras, and film scoring. Music without the baggage of personalities, fame, or heartbreak became his sanctuary. This period of his life became a form of recovery, a way for him to heal from the emotional exhaustion of ABBA's explosive success. Benny's work during these years wasn't just about creating new sounds. It was a form of therapy. The music he composed for Chess and Christina Fran de Vemela allowed him to explore deep emotional territory. He used these projects as an outlet for feelings he hadn't fully expressed during ABBA's reign. Working in the world of theater gave Benny the chance to detach from the pop world, where he had once been part of a machine that churned out hits, and focus on something more personal and introspective. It was a journey of artistic resurrection, where Benny could rebuild his creative identity on his own terms. As he worked through these new projects, Benny began to confront emotions he had buried for years. He admitted in a later interview that, during the 90s, he kept a journal filled with unsent letters. These letters were addressed to his former bandmates, Frida, Agnetha, and Bjorn. In those pages, he wrote everything he had been too afraid to say in the 70s when the music, the fame, and the tension were at their peak. The letters were a raw, emotional exercise, helping Benny work through feelings of guilt, frustration, and unspoken love that had haunted him. Reflecting on aging, Benny has said that he feels freer now as a musician than he ever did in ABBA. There's a sense of liberation in knowing that he no longer has to chase fame or approval. He can create purely for himself, without the weight of external expectations. But that freedom comes with its own price, a lingering sense of unfinished business. Benny often feels haunted by the past, not just by the music, but by the emotional complexity of his life during ABBA's peak. He admits that he never fully understood his experiences while living them, and only now, with distance, can he begin to make sense of it all. In his later years, Benny has embraced a role that goes beyond just creating music for himself. He began mentoring young Scandinavian composers, passing on his knowledge and experience. But it's not just about teaching them the technicalities of music. It's about guiding them in emotional honesty, something Benny himself didn't fully grasp in his earlier years. He's become a wise elder figure, offering advice not only on composition, but on navigating the emotional challenges that come with being an artist. It's his way of shaping the next generation, not just in terms of sound, but in terms of understanding the emotional complexities that shape a career. Benny's journey from the tortured genius of ABBA to the reflective mentor today is a testament to his growth as a person and an artist. In the aftermath of ABBA's success, he found a way to rebuild his creative life in a more honest and meaningful way. His time in isolation wasn't just a retreat from the public eye, but a chance for him to rediscover who he was beyond the fame and the music. Through his work in theater and his mentoring, Benny has found a way to connect with music on a deeper level, and in doing so, has become a guide for others who will follow in his footsteps. His story is a powerful reminder that reinvention is possible, even for those who have already achieved everything. The truth, what we always suspected. In a rare moment of reflection, Benny Andersson, now 78, drops the ultimate confession. He admits something that many had long suspected, but few dare to say out loud. ABBA wasn't built on joy. It was built on pain, escape, and fragile humanity. In a recent interview, Benny lays it all bare when he says, ABBA worked because we were broken. The music made us feel whole. This simple yet profound statement reveals the truth behind ABBA's immense success. The group didn't thrive because they were flawless or always happy, but because they were deeply flawed and in search of something that could make them feel alive. Their music became an emotional lifeline, a way to keep moving forward when everything else felt uncertain. Looking back, Benny admits that he once thought time would bring closure to the story of ABBA, that with the years would come a sense of resolution. But what he's learned through the passage of time is not closure, but understanding. He now sees ABBA's legacy through a more honest lens, not as a perfect, flawless fairy tale, but as something deeply human. We weren't a fairy tale, Benny says. We were four people trying not to fall apart. The music was the only thing holding us together. This realization changes everything we thought we knew about the band's rise to fame, their relationships, and their eventual collapse. The truth is, ABBA didn't fall apart because of the pressure of fame or the tabloid stories that surrounded their personal lives. It wasn't the public's expectations or the constant spotlight that caused the cracks to appear. It was something deeper, something more difficult to face. The music, the very thing that connected them to each other and the world, was also the thing that kept them from truly confronting their personal struggles. The people in ABBA were too human to withstand the weight of their emotions, and the music they created became a way to escape the chaos that lurked beneath the surface. Benny's reflection on ABBA's history sheds light on a more complex truth about the band's internal dynamics. They weren't just four talented musicians who had a magical chemistry on stage. They were individuals who were grappling with personal turmoil, emotional pain, and the realities of fame that they didn't know how to navigate. As Benny looks back on their time together, he admits that the music served as a refuge, a temporary escape from the pressures that came with being part of ABBA. The joy people saw on stage was real, but it was also a mask. Behind the smiles, the laughter, and the hit songs, there were four people trying to make sense of their fractured lives. This final chapter brings every thread of ABBA's story full circle: love, silence, ambition, fame, loss, and survival. Each of these elements played a role in the band's journey, but none of them tell the full story. The band's rise was built on talent and timing, but their collapse wasn't about the lack of either. It was a result of their humanity, their personal struggles, emotional baggage, and the weight of their own expectations. Benny reveals that, in hindsight, the cracks were there from the very beginning, but they were covered up by the sheer force of their collective drive and the music they created. It was never about perfection. It was about survival. Now, at 78, Benny is no longer chasing applause or validation. He's chasing the truth. For the first time, he feels free to tell his side of the story without the fear of damaging a legacy or disappointing fans. This is Benny, who has long since made peace with the band's tumultuous past. He no longer feels the need to maintain the image of ABBA as the perfect pop group. Instead, he embraces a reality that ABBA was just as flawed and vulnerable as the rest of us. And in telling the truth about the band's history, Benny has rewritten what ABBA truly was. A group that wasn't held together by fame or fairy tale dreams, but by the music that allowed them to survive their personal battles. As the final chapter of the story unfolds, Benny's confession rings clear. ABBA didn't break because of fame, relationships, or external pressure. It broke because the people inside it were too human, too real, and too vulnerable to withstand the weight of it all. The music was their escape, their therapy, and their connection to each other. But in the end, it couldn't save them from their own fragility. In finally sharing his truth, Benny has taken a final step in understanding ABBA's legacy, not as a perfect image, but as a deeply human, flawed, and beautiful journey. The real story of ABBA isn't about the fame, the glamour, or the glossy magazine covers, and it's about the pain, the escape, and the shared humanity that made their music so powerful. And now, with his confession, Benny has given us the ultimate insight into what ABBA really was. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen for more amazing content.